Gotta get better at doing this live stuff. Let's see. All right, let's listen to this.
Right? In America, we know the story of our oppressors. We don't know the story of those who fought against that oppression. We don't know what their lives were like. We don't really understand what it's like to have even pride in being a Black American unless it's looked at as more of like a Republican thing lifestyle, right? But when it comes to the reality of the Black American gods, if you will, I was listening to a publication and it was saying that it was on Black Magic. He was talking with a sister, I think her name is Sister Isis or something of that nature, and it's talking about you got the Egyptian gods, which is nice to understand that, but then you also have the Black gods that are the Black American gods, if you will, where, you know, Egypt was not just in, or Kemet, I would say, and Kemet, I'm talking about more so that mindset of things that we built was not just in, you know, Northern Africa or in Egypt, but we built here. There are pyramids here. There's pyramids and there's, you know, mummies that have been found in America, 12,000-year-old mummies, and pyramids that's been found here in America. So why don't you think that we know, of course I know this answer, but I want to hear yours. Why do...
All right, real quick, let me show this. Just to hit on that pyramid comment that he made. The History Channel, this was the History Channel talking about. Despite the towering reputation of Egypt's Great Pyramids at Giza, the Americas actually contain more pyramid structures than the rest of the world, than the rest of the planet combined. All right, I just wanted to show that real quick. Well, we all knew that, but I just wanted to put that in there.
Think that we know how special we are in America.
They have to create a narrative that we are guests in our own country. The narrative that we were just brought over here to a new country by white people. Our history was stripped from us and we were slaves, and white people felt the kindness of their heart to free us. And we had the civil rights movement and then a Black president. That's the narrative that they want to give us because that disempowers us. That makes us feel like...
Okay, so that's the narrative, right? That's the narrative that he brought up. That's the narrative that they want us to buy into, right? That we was trafficked over here from Africa, brought to these
our
lands.
history was stripped from us. And
okay, that's the narrative he said they created.
White people felt the kindness of their heart to free us. And we had the civil rights movement and then a Black president. That's the narrative that they want to give us because that disempowers us. That makes us feel like we can't do anything unless we get the approval of a white person. That's the common thing. If you go to the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C., that is really the whole theme of it. When you walk through history, you see slavery, civil rights, and they got a big picture of Obama at the very end. That's not all about history. We are the culture of America. The good thing about us is that we can claim African history because genetically we are African people. We can claim Kemet. We can claim all of the great rulers that occurred in Africa. We can claim the Moors. That's a part of our bloodline as well.
Okay, let me say something about that, right? So the good thing about us is that we could claim the Moors, we could claim Kemet, we could claim all these different African civilizations because we're genetically tied to these people somehow, right? But it's weird because no one else operates like that. You know, just because we have a genetic trait where we share melanated skin and we have different facial features or different hair textures that are similar doesn't mean that we can take their history. We can't take the history of the Ethiopians. Us over here, us in California, us in South Carolina, us in Texas, the blacks that I'm talking about. We can't take other people's history. Those people are not our people. We're not from there. Okay? You don't see Russians saying, "Oh, yeah, we share genetic similarities with Italians, so we're going to take the Italians' history. Italy's history is ours too, but we're from Russia." No, we don't have a nationality, and we haven't operated with a nationality, so we say things like this. But when you understand that you need a nationality, and a nationality is a specific term that designates a geographical location and a specific ethnic group, when we don't understand that, we make comments such as what he just said. Everyone in Africa's history is our history. No, it's not. It's not. It's really not.
What makes us unique is the history here in the Americas, because the United States was built by foundational Black Americans. There was no United States until we built it. We have a very special claim here because every part of the culture here, we either created it or we influenced it.
That's a fact.
And many of our accomplishments are erased or given to other people. When we say the term African American, which is a term that was popularized in 1988 by Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson and the Boule and the Congressional Black Caucus had a press conference at a hotel in Chicago at the behest of the white Democratic Party, and they said, Black Americans now want to be labeled African Americans because we want to be grounded in a motherland, and they started to promote the term African American. They did this not to give us a cultural relevance, because we already had a cultural relevance here. This is our culture. What they wanted to do was make us comparable to immigrants. So an African American is no different from a Hispanic American, which is no different from an Arab American, which is no different from a Chinese American. So the narrative becomes, all of you minority groups contributed to the greatness of America.
Right.
So when we give something to Black people, let's give it to all minorities because you're all equal. Right. That was a trick bag. And they do that right now. Whenever we start talking about reparations, which we deserve, well, all people suffered. All people experience racism.
Right.
So we have to stop that narrative, and this is why the foundational Black American movement is taking hold so strongly right now, because we're claiming our specific lineage. No disrespect to anybody else,
right?
But we have a unique lineage as people who descended from the slaves who built this country, who were the foundation of this country.
Right.
No other group. Other groups left their homeland to come here to benefit.
So I think he'll clarify, but he's still accepting that narrative that the slaves that came here or were slaved up here built the country. So he's not refuting the fact that the Africa transatlantic slave trade didn't happen. He's accepting that part of the narrative, I assume. But he is going to address the people that were here. Let's see what he got to say.
Americans built.
That's a fact.
These are just facts. No disrespect to nobody.
Now, what about the narrative of us also being Native Americans, right? Specifically in the case of basically saying that most of the melanated people in America, when I say melanated, I'm just being politically correct, right? Just to include, the way various groups of Black people categorize ourselves, right? So let's say the melanated people here, right? The brown people, right? Dark brown people, copper color. We're here already when a white man gets here. Christopher Columbus never stepped a foot on America, right? So we know that he never discovered anything, but when he got lost, right? And his peoples got lost over here, right? They seen that we was already here. We was thriving. We had our tribal and nomadic ways of living, right? And there was already African explorers who came over here already doing trade and things of that nature, right? And so within that, there was already populations of people that were here, right? Now, we know that the Native Americans, of course, were slaughtered, right? Because the white man wanted to take claim of America.
So that's a part of the narrative, too, that we've been sold, that they came over here and they slaughtered Native Americans. So specifically, Native Americans are these Siberian, Mongolian, nomadic peoples that traveled over here. That's who we attribute to be the Native American. That's who the consensus is on who the Native American is. That particular person that we all see, Hollywood has popularized it. But that's who we're talking about.
You do trace root genealogy and people go look at their family history and they do one of those tests, they're going to be like, wait a minute, my family was here, which also gives me rights under these treaties in America, right? And so one of the most...
So we understand that. So that's the thing, like it's a narrative that we also right here, he's reciting the narrative that we've been taught about Native Americans. The Europeans came here, dominated, slaughtered them. That's what we need to forget. We need to revisit that.
Highest forms of argument that I hear is that black people can't get reparations because specifically of the word black. That is not a nationality. So what then do you say to that particular argument? Because I'm 100%, 1,000% for reparations. I just want to know, do we have to change the language in order for the law to be written?
No, we don't have to change the language. This whole thing where you have to have a flag that's recognized by the UN and all of that stuff. Well, you have a rainbow flag that's not represented by the UN, and LGBT white people get all types of money and benefits.
Right, okay. But they're not trying to be a nation. They're not trying to make transgender or homosexuality or lesbianism, or they're not trying to make that a nationality. You know, it's a difference. So you can't apply that same thought process to people that are trying to get a name for themselves that will signal their geographical location, where their ancestors come from. It's not the same. Like, we do need a flag.
Some of the Native
and we need it to be
tribes,
based off of real information.
These were tribes that were named by the Spanish.
Let's hear what he got to say about this.
When the Spanish came along and saw a bunch of different tribes living among the Creek area, they said, well, you guys are Creek Indians.
Yeah.
When they saw some Native Americans and black Aboriginal people living together, they said, those look like runaways. And the word for runaway at the time was Cimarron. So they called them Cimarrons, which turned into Seminole. Yeah. So these names come from these different places, and the names vary, but these people are compensated. We can get compensation without having to do all of this crazy paperwork because they owe us. We're supposed to get what we're supposed to get. And going back to the whole narrative about us having some black Aboriginal people, that's absolutely correct. When all of the European explorers came here, Columbus's brother, Pizarro, Balboa, every single one of them said that they saw black-skinned people here who looked like
Pizarro, Columbus's brother, Balboa. Let's see. Where did those people go? Pizarro took several expeditions throughout South America, gaining land and wealth for Spain. His journeys took him across the Atlantic Ocean, through tropical jungles, over mountains, and across coastal deserts of South America. So Pizarro didn't come to North America. Where did Columbus' brother travel? He traveled primarily to the Caribbean, including Bahamas, Cuba, Santo Domingo, Jamaica, and his later two voyages traveled to the coast of eastern Central America and northern South America. Okay, he didn't come there. He didn't come to North America. Balboa and his men set sail in 1501 with two ships in Santa Maria de Gracia. They crossed the Atlantic Ocean and eventually reached the northern coast of South America, now present-day Venezuela and Colombia. So, see, that's the issue. Like, people just start talking, they're not real scholars, and you mentioned three people that supposedly came to North America to mention what they said. I'm sure they did. They mentioned that they did see people that look like what he described, but bro, they didn't come to North America. And that's the problem. When we don't truly know the information, we don't truly crack books open, the right books that we're supposed to be reading, we'll have no idea and just have talking heads like this just say stuff that is not accurate. Okay, so if you wanted to know what happened in North America, you're gonna have to look at different people that came over here. Okay, you're gonna have to look at France when they first arrived in Florida. You're gonna have to look at Spain, but you're not looking at Balboa and Pizarro and Christopher Columbus's brother. Okay, you're gonna be looking at people like this. The first people that came into Florida that's gonna give you an accurate description, okay, Pedro Menendez. We need to know who this is. The Spanish settlements within the present day limits of the United States, Florida, 1562. Okay, let's go back. I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's go back. Let the brother keep talking.
One of them. We get the notion that a Native American is the Mongoloid looking person, which is just one variation of the Aboriginal people here. They would use the red.
So the natives, we just have people talking, right? They just talk. And we say and regurgitate things when we never fact check stuff. So Native Americans are not an Aboriginal people here, okay? They just not. And when we go and we look up Dr. Sam Richards at Penn State University, and we look at what Penn State is talking about, okay? We get really scholastic. Let's be real scholars. And when we see who Penn State is saying the Native American
Everybody,
is.
just I want you to pair up on this slide.
They're not Aboriginal to the Americas. We're going to get into something real quick, but listen to this.
Who's Native American? Just pair up with someone sitting next to you. It's not a trick question, by the way. Only one. What'd you say?
Nobody even knows who Native American is, yo.
You said B? What'd you say? C?
They're not from here.
Yeah? Did you say B? C? You said C? Damn, dude.
I can't really see A that well, but I guess from the other ones, I'd say B.
You'd say B? Okay, well, the answer is A, by the way. The others... Did anybody say A? All right, good. So, the others are Siberian, so we're going to come to this. All right, let's do the next one.
These are not Aboriginal people, okay? They came over here from another place. They never set up any major societies or civilizations here. They were not the mound builders here. We're going to get into that. But just, they didn't grow tobacco here. They didn't farm. They wasn't farmers. They wasn't major agriculturalists here. Those Native Americans that we all know and think to be the people that the so-called white man wiped out, those people are not Aboriginal. But let's listen to the brother. I keep cutting him off. My bad.
Natives, many times, to be pitted against the black-skinned Aboriginals. They were the ones who were helping to capture some of the black-skinned Native Americans and Aboriginals.
Okay, so the Native Americans are capturing black-skinned Native Americans. Okay, they sound so primitive from the way he put it, but we'll see.
And then at one point, they started to redefine some of the natives who were black-skinned and called them Negro. This is very well documented. Then, going into the 1900s, they had something called the Dawes Rolls, where they had a census where they were going to take track of all of the Native Americans and the Aboriginal people. The black people, they just labeled them freedmen or Negro, and white people who wanted to get some of the benefits of being a Native American paid money under the table. They paid $5 to get listed on the census form. And that's where the term $5 Indian comes from. Most the people claiming Native American that you see are white people who ain't got now drop of damn Native American blood in them.
This is a fact.
So what is Native American blood?
I think what
is Native American blood if there's so many different Native Americans?
The tribe they out there in the Southamptons. They're the only black, like fully black tribe that you go.
Shinnecock?
Yeah, Shinnecock Nation. Yeah. So they invited me up there. I went to go speak to some of them. And they're the only tribe that has never left their land, so they never lost it. So their land is not in the treaty of the United States government. It's in their own treaty, so they have true sovereignty, right? And so it perplexes me that when you go up there, this is right next to the Hamptons, right? And then they hate them rich people hate them over there because they got real true sovereign claim to the land. But they're as dark as you and darker than me. Some are lighter, right? But most of them are dark-skinned black people.
I think Flavor Flav is descended from that tribe.
Yeah.
Old Dirty Bastard was...
Yep, exactly.
So then what is that? You know what I'm saying? We're not diving into what that is because we think that people that look like Flavor Flav came over here on the transatlantic slave trade. So what really was happening? What was this in the 1700s? What was this in the 1800s? What was this in the 1700s, 16 and 1500s? Like on a chronological timeline.
From that tribe, yeah.
So it's like, but we get this notion in our head that they look like, Mexicans, modern day Mexicans as they do today. So that skew that's in our head of history is just wrong. Because when we think about our story and time and what was happening during that time, we think about the modern Hollywood actors, right, that are played as Native Americans.
Right.
We don't think of...
Explain that. Let's listen to what the brother said about this.
We don't think of Flavor Flav, right? We don't think of somebody that looks like you and I.
Right.
So we don't even think to dig and look into that.
Right.
And what's interesting, a lot of black artists back in the day, they would acknowledge their Native ancestry. Chuck Berry had Native ancestry.
Yeah.
James Brown had Native ancestry. Take a good look at James Brown.
Yeah.
You did? Take a real good look at it. You can see
this.
it.
Look at
Johnny Mathis. That's another one.
Wait, so what are you saying? Wait, what is he saying? What is he saying right here? Because he said that, why is he saying you could see his Native ancestry? So when I'm looking at James Brown, I'm supposed to see through that and see this in James Brown. But when I see James Brown, I see somebody, you feel what I'm saying? How do I articulate that real quick? Wouldn't I see both? If he's trying to make this comparison, I would see both the Native ancestry, not just this Native ancestry. He's still buying into that same narrative that this is what the Native American looks like.
Jackson looked like he probably did too.
Yeah. The Jackson family does.
Yeah.
So if you just look like 19 Keys, or if you just even look like Tariq Nasheed, right? If you just look like Tariq Nasheed, then you don't have Native American ancestry? Is that what he's saying?
Hendrix.
Yeah.
He was part Native American. Look at how he dressed. He would dress like a Native American when you look back at how he
That's a
dressed.
fact, with the fringes and stuff.
Yes, indeed.
Oh,
So we
hell
knew.
no.
We've always known that.
Yeah.
We've always had that.
Wait, so he's saying we've always known that we were mixed. That's what he's saying. That's damn, they got us in a trick bag still. When they sitting together thinking that they understand it, they're still in the trick bag.
That camaraderie with that ancestry. And in the Jim Crow era, there was a man named Walter Plecker, who was a part of the Vital Statistics Office in Virginia. They started doing paper genocide. They would look at black people, look at their birth records, and anybody who looked like they could have any black ancestry, they would reclassify
What is black ancestry, bro?
them as Negro. Whatever tribe they were from, like, nah, his nose is too big, Negro. Lips too big, Negro. And they would do this all up into the 1960s. The Loving versus the State of Virginia case, where they did that movie about the black woman marrying this white man, she's really a Native American. A lot of folks don't know that. I want y'all to look that case up. That's really a Native American. She's an Aboriginal person. But she was reclassified as a Negro. So that paper genocide is a real thing.
That's the United States setting up the whole thing. They're taking your nationality away from, giving you a colorable term, and they're taking you away from your sovereign rights. So let's listen.
That's why we really, our history is so entangled.
Yeah.
You understand me? And it's kind of, you got to go in there and release the knots.
Right.
Like when I study John Horse, and I'm looking at how, number one, his story is incredible.
Yes, it is.
The man fought multiple war fronts, right? He fought against America. He fought for America.
I'm about to go
right? He
in
fought
for
on
y'all
the side
right
of the
now.
Seminole Indians. He was giving his freedom in Florida. Then it was taken back, right? And then he ended up going missing somewhere in Mexico. But when I think about the significance of that, it's
19,
like, of
I'm
course,
about to show you
we
something,
don't,
19.
you want to teach this in American history school, right?
Shit.
They talk about critical race theory and things of that nature, but that doesn't even go deeper enough to expose, because American history has to be exposed, not just taught. This is the reality of it. It has to be an expose on, wait a minute, this black man was directly, and then, you know, when you go into that history, you see that the Indians had, or the Native Americans had their own form of slavery as well. It wasn't chattel slavery, but they owned blacks as well. So when you expose
They own, see, we don't know about this.
You're going to see children. You're going to see marriages.
We don't know about this.
And then you're going to say, wait a minute. This is my family right here. My family is traced back here. Your government made a deal for this land that my family lineage would own this. So, of course, we don't need you to know your story. We're not going to teach this in school. We don't want you to start having claim to rights to land.
Exactly.
We spent this whole last 100 years trying to steal all your land from your people.
Exactly. And going
So
into
how do you
John
answer
Horse,
that?
That was a phenomenal brother. That was one of the greatest military leaders in American history. That's never talked about. This was a brother who was down there in Florida fighting in the Seminole War, and they've always made the Seminole War seem like it was a Native American against the government. Even they at the time said this is a Negro war. We can lie later, which is what they're doing now. But they said when they were fighting, we got to stop playing. These are Negroes and they're beating the brakes off of us because they don't want to be on no plantation and they're fighting to the death. It was black people down in Florida burning down plantations. They halted the slave business down in Florida. They were freeing people, slaughtering the white generals and the white U.S. Army military personnel. Many of those counties down there are named after the white people who were slaughtered. Dade was slaughtered by some of those black Seminoles. Dade County is named after him. The Seminoles went in there, the brothers, which I call the Maroons, because that's what they were. They were living in the swamps. They hopped out on Dade and slaughtered like 100 of his guys. They made a treaty with the United States saying that they could get their freedom if they chose to move out of Florida. So they fought and won their freedom. They never framed it like that. They got their freedom and they were told they got to move to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. That's why a lot of the black Seminoles ended up in Oklahoma. Some of the Redskin natives were trying to enslave them, so they said,
so it's a lot of talking with no timelines, okay? And we just nod our heads and we say, we do all that. But I want to get into a timeline for y'all. And the Brother 19 Keys brought up some critical things where he mentioned that, you know, Flavor Flav is a Native American or claims to be a Shinnecock, right? So we're all going down this road of just misinformation. We clearly know that we was lied to, okay? We clearly know that we was lied to from the U.S. government, but somehow we still want to keep these same narratives. Let me show you this. So the brother none of the scholars that are in the community right now are addressing anything that's really happening in the world. We seem to be the only ones that are still sticking to this transatlantic slave story. But they've been changing the history. What is Alex Wagner talking about with the Florida teachers?
Began. She walked me through the official state education department training on the subject of slavery. The only thing I can find in this slide, in this entire presentation about enslaved people, it's one slide and it says less than 4% of slavery in the Western Hemisphere was in colonial America. The number of enslaved people increased in America through birth. What is happening here in the slide?
Yeah.
What's this?
So this is a map kind of showing how the transatlantic slave trade brought enslaved people to both of the Americas. There's a heavy emphasis that those people were brought to South America.
It's a much bigger arrow.
Right. And where we're at in North America, you know, our colonies are a very small sliver. And there was this heavy emphasis that most of our enslaved people were born here. Almost to say it was less bad.
Almost to say there were no Africans. That's what you should have said. But watch what the journalists say. She's skilled, so she redirects y'all. She say she's trying to focus on humanity.
Enslaved children.
Right.
For generations.
To say they were born here, we didn't steal them and bring them on a boat, is kind of what it felt like.
Sort of making a difference between slaves born in the United States and those born in Africa, and suggesting somehow that slave life, that our moral debt is less because they were born into slavery as opposed to snatched from their homes.
Yes, that's definitely how I felt they were portraying this information.
So they acting like that. They're not even tripping over the fact that it wasn't Africans that came over here. They're tripping over the fact that the wording is trying to somehow make slavery like less inhumane. They totally accepted the fact that Africans did not come over here. They was not trafficked over here by the millions. Come on. Like, we still believe that. That foundational Black American ideology or that movement is based off of we were slaves that got trafficked over here and we built the country, so we're foundationally Black. So let's go. It seems like we the only people that still don't know what happened. So let's look. I'm just trying to give y'all some background information before I get into this really quick. But look at this. This is Don Jordan and Michael Walsh. Okay, they wrote the book White Cargo. But listen to what they talking about.
And terrific book. Yeah. Ideas of we unearthed a wider and wider story. We found it wasn't just women, it was children, it was convicts, it was prisoners of...
In London in the early 1600s and sent off to the new colonies in America as brides for the planters, if you like.
Right,
so
let's
these
go
were
back.
women...
Check this out.
A copy of this book and he will tell you what happened then.
Well, I suppose that I'm laurel to Mike's Hardy.
Really pay attention
That
to
is
this.
what a fine mess he got me into, in that I read the photocopies of what he had brought back, and what he brought back was photocopies of a book written by a man called Abbott Emerson Smith, who had written about how women, mainly prostitutes, but all sorts of other people as well, who were taken out of the Bridewell prison in London in the early 1600s and sent off to the new colonies in America as brides for the planters, if you like. So these were women of marriageable age or of breeding age or whatever, who would be sent off, because up until then, of course, you had a brand new colony, it was all men, and for this to become viable, they needed women. And this seemed to be an astonishing thing, and so it went from there. And one looked at this and thought, well, this is just the tip of something. This is actually the edge of something here. And so the very fact that these women were taken out of the penal system in Britain, in England, and sent off to the new colonies with no say for themselves about whether or not they went or not. So the interesting thing was, what was it they were going into? What was it that was already there that these people could just be taken out and shipped 3,000 miles away? And so we started to look at what this possibly could mean and what the wider context was of that. And that's how it began.
Listen.
And we unearthed a wider and wider story. We found it wasn't just women, it was children, it was convicts, it was prisoners of war, it was all sorts. So people who signed up as indentured servants to get to America free of, they didn't have to pay the passage, the poor. They would be contracted, indentured by merchants and by captains and by planters' agents to go to America free, in return for which they gave up their rights to their labour for several years. It was supposed to be, according to history, it's 4 or 5 years. In fact, it could be as many as 12. And what they didn't realise was that they were signing away all their rights, and they had become chattels. They were used as property, regarded as property. Now, as we began to investigate this, and we used all the kind of resources that investigators do. We look at every kind of book, every kind of official report, etc., diaries, letters. We realised it was an enormous story, and it was also something which refuted one of the great ideas, one of the key ideas of the development of slavery, which is 1619 slavery began in America with the arrival of 20 and odd Negroes, as they were called, sold, according to accounts, by a Dutch captain to planters in England, and this was where slavery began. Well, it wasn't true. Slavery had begun earlier. Children and women and convicts had been sold earlier than that, and although a small number of Africans were subsequently brought to Virginia and sold over the next decades, only very few, only 350 years later. 20 years later.
Meanwhile,
but in the meantime, hundreds, thousands of poor whites were being brought in, and on various convicts and children, etc., and they were being enslaved. So that started us thinking this is an enormous story. It was a story too big, in fact, to sell to television.
Too big for TV.
There were so many aspects of it, we didn't know how to compact it. But
they'll give y'all a
was
little bit
an
of
important and terrific book.
They're going to give y'all all that.
And then the question was, if we were right on what was going on, the question in your mind immediately is, as a journalist, is, well, why doesn't everybody know this already? Or have we just got the wrong end of the stick here? And that is, of course, everybody's fear. I mean, it's the fear if you're doing something contemporary, just as it is if you're doing something that's historical. That the famous kind of thing was that I remember when we worked in World in Action was, there would be the person who would turn up with 3 briefcases full of documents. And your first thing in your mind was, is this person a crank or are they real? They've got a bee in their bonnet, they feel aggrieved, something terrible as far as they're concerned has happened in their lives. The question in your mind is, am I on the edge of a great story here, or is this another one of the astonishing numbers of cranks of the kind of green and red ink brigade, yet again turning up with 1,000 documents to prove something which is totally and utterly mad and it's just a bee in their bonnet. So, of course, we were immediately worried about that as well. But we noticed certain patterns that, as we started to look at this, that appear. One of which was that when you looked at these early people who were sent out, like Mike just talked about, children were sent out, street children were rounded up and sent off. And when you read about the official versions as to why this was happening in the very early 17th century, the official versions were always that this was a great humanitarian thing, that they were taking these poor urchins off the street and sending them off to start a new life in these fabulous new colonies, where instead of having a dead-end life where they die on the streets of malnutrition and illness, they would be given a new chance. Well, if that were true, it suddenly occurred to us, we would surely know that, because that would be one of the greatest humanitarian things that's ever happened in the history of the world. So why was it that that's where it was painted up at the time, which it was? Even John Donne, the famous poet, who was the Dean of St. Paul's, actually gave sermons from the pulpit of St. Paul's Cathedral about how this is a wonderful humanitarian thing, that these kids who have been sent off for this fresh chance. Now, if that was true, why isn't it something, you'd know that at school, you'd be taught about it. But interestingly, it's something which at the time was made a big deal of, but not now. It's not on any syllabus. So there was obviously something odd about this.
Well, it's still perpetuated. You find that some history books still talk glowingly about how starving kids were sent to America and apprenticed. You could find it where it happened at Bridewell, St. Bride's Church. I believe there is a commemoration of the apprentices who were saved and sent to America. Well, we looked at the documents as you should. We looked at every document.
You should.
Sure, historians must have done, but they missed a lot, because those documents showed that these children were picked up and they were going to be sold, and what they were going to be priced for, and what rights they didn't have. In fact, the company gave to itself all rights over these children. It pretended to anxious parents, there were some, that they would be given apprenticeships, they'd get land in the end. Nonsense. Most of them were dead within a year anyway, but this is still perpetuated. Sorry, I interrupted you. Right. But thank God there are loads and loads of documents from the 17th and 18th centuries.
None of which have been reviewed by any of the scholars, any of the Afrocentric scholars that are out here. I'm not going to name no names, but it's so much information, books that we haven't tapped into. Data, books that have data in them, not just emotional books, not just feel-good books to say, oh, we're from Africa, ancient Egypt. No, things that really you need to know what really happened. You need to have real books that you just can't go to the bookstore, Barnes & Noble, and buy. You have to really study. And you got people having platforms. Luckily enough, the brother 19 Keys is asking the questions to the people that he thinks should have the answers. But none of these people are real scholars, like with real deal information, going to lectures, out in the field, collecting data with the archaeologists. You know what I'm saying? None of the scholars are doing that. So because none of the scholars are doing that, we're running with all of the narratives that have been taught to us, but we're changing them and we think that we're doing something, but we really don't even know what's going on. Like, let's listen to what this dude got to say a little bit more.
And amazingly, and to be blunt, to look at, to say, well, why hasn't that appeared? Why hasn't that been used? And you can test, as a journalist should, assumptions against these documents.
So they created, like, to say, once again, they created the transatlantic slave trade for y'all. They got y'all thinking y'all from Africa, right? When they wasn't shipping us over here, they was shipping themselves over here. Okay, they were really trying to do business. Before any of that shipping came into play, they were just trying to do business. It was just small enterprises that was going around for their particular country, trying to see if they could set up allyship with some strong, real royal people. You know what I'm saying? We don't know that this even took place. So we're going to get into this. I'm just trying to give a little back information on what's going on who's out there talking.
The assumptions are wrong. So perhaps some of ours are, but certainly a lot of the general historians' assumptions are bloody wrong.
So the transatlantic slave trade one is wrong, okay? So the Native American story, the Native American narrative is wrong.
Our starting point was to see why these assumptions had grown up and why it was that what we were seeing in the contemporary documentation seemed to show a completely, if you like, a parallel universe. There's the official story and there's the unofficial or perhaps true story, and we see huge parallels today in so many things, and it shows that spin was alive and well in the 17th century, just like
spin was alive and well in the 17th century. Okay, so if you don't know how to cross-reference, if you don't know how to accurately interpret information, you will be in the dark, and people will be able to play you.
It's not. You have the official story about what's happening, and then you have the hidden or covert story about what is really going on.
The hidden, the covert story, what's really going on. And the covert story is available now. It was much harder to access the covert story way back in the day when all the information was just in books that was in certain people's private libraries or whatever. But now that if you know how to research, if you were taught how to research in a higher level institution, higher level of education institution, you would be able to find certain things that you need to know about. But if you wasn't educated in how to research, then it'll be a hard time. You'll be listening to hearsay.
From that great man, Thomas Jefferson. He was worried about the idea that lots of convicts have been sent to America, and God forbid, some Americans have been descended from convicts. He wrote this: "The malefactors sent to America were not sufficient in number to merit enumeration as one class. I do not think that the whole number sent would amount to 2,000, and being principally men eaten up with disease, they married seldom and propagated little. I do not suppose that themselves and their descendants are at present 4,000, which is little more than 1,000th part of the whole inhabitants. At that time, 1,000 convicts a year were being sent to America. According to unimpeachable sources, if you can believe convict traders, in Maryland alone, 600 a year had been going for 60 years. Tens of thousands of convicts have been flooding America, but does America want to know? No, it doesn't, and hasn't ever since. You've got all kinds of self-delusions. I mean, you've got ideas about why America was so...
They made y'all buy into this race shit so big when it's all a lie. They got you mad because you black skin and feeling like you've been stepped on for 400 years when that ain't even the real story. That's just a psychological trick. It's crazy.
In preventing the truth from...
I think that because of being an emergent nation, it was necessary to have a kind of creation myth.
An emerging nation needs a creation myth, okay? The colonies are over here trying to break away from what they're running from in Europe, and they need a creation myth. And the most powerful people that exist in the land at the time when they get here, this is the 1500s, this guy lived in the 1500s. They need them to forget who they are and who they connected with, okay? The creation story. So let's get back. We talking to more Afrocentric scholars.
The names, but their faces will tell you exactly who they were.
Right.
Because their physiognomy is, you cannot deny who you're looking at when you look at the face of an old man.
Yeah, that's the thing about us. They always trying to make us deny our eyes.
Yes.
Like, I can see it. I don't need to know nothing else.
That's it.
Like, you can come up, you can try to justify why what you seeing, right, is not real, but I don't need no other explanation, right? So they come up with a whole entire, subjects of scholarship to try to disprove what I'm seeing with my eyes with this big nose, big lips, brown skin, and that's not a black person because the pigmentation back in the day, or maybe they just represented it that because it was hard to shape. Like, come on, man. Come on. You ain't fooling me, you fooling you. Why not? Because this is the combatant of the Petet, right? Versus the Christ consciousness. So you have to put symbols that are in representation of that Christ consciousness to help you crystallize, because your lower and higher is always fighting. And they trying to get you crystallized on evil to sell yourself. And we trying to get you crystallized.
Let's go to this part.
Right now, today we have, the textbook definition, the law, because we're dealing with commerce, we're dealing with law structures. And so, which are two different things, because before these dictionaries were written, the word was still used, but the connotation was not connected to it and its attachment. So the negative aspects that people read and know about the word black today was not described in ancient times. So some people, it's like when a person picks up the word niggas and they said, well, we can say nigga because in niggas in Ethiopia, it meant kings, right? So some people would say, well, black in Egypt, that was a representation of Kemet, right? The land of blacks. Or some people would say that can also describe those people in that region, but you can also find in different places where people were described by their description. Or brown, right? Because of brown people, I'm copper color right here. You feel me? Mm-hmm. So I'm a copper colored man if we're going by accurate description.
Sure.
But and I can understand why the word black has, and why my brothers say that, the legal description, like in the Black's Law Dictionary, does not define a people who have a nationality or have rights within the land, right? But then we look at the Jews, and they were able to get, they recognized as a religion, from a nationality to a religion, like being Jewish was recognized from a religion to a nationality, rather. Right? And I was thinking, like, if they can get, this recognized as a religion, as a nationality, why can't black people get that recognized as a nationality and change the books? Okay. And the reason I say that is because the question becomes for me is, a word is a word, right? We can stop using a word. I'm fine with that. I'm not attached or emotionally charged to words like that. The question becomes is, what's more efficient, right? What's the easiest process to do to get black people to stop calling themselves black? Right? Or for us to change the definition and connection and connotation to it. But when we talk about, like, let's say reparations, and we say, well, we're going to give black people reparations, there's no specificity of who gets that until you go look at, like, what Tariq Nasheed breaks down with African descendants of slaves, which is then saying that, no, we're talking about American, right? Native American people, or and by Native American, I'm talking about what's known as black people. Mm-hmm. You feel me? And we're saying that this is the way for us to identify them in America. Because when we say black, that's the Caribbeans, that's my African brothers, that's any immigrant that comes over. So how do you know who to get reparations from? Yes, you have to have an identity so that you can even direct these reparations to the right people in the first place. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, I can understand, because that goes towards process. Right? But
so that's what we're trying to figure out, right? And clearly, the brother is asking very specific questions. So, are we African? No, we're not African, right? Are we Native American? That term was created by the curriculum makers. So Native American is just a made-up terminology, right? So what we don't know and what we really need to know, what we really need to break into is the Mississippian history, okay? Because there is a name for blacks, which it isn't FBA, okay? It's not Commissions, it's not Moors, okay? It is Mississippian. When you go into archaeology and you look at the people that dominated the land at the time period when they first arrived over here, it was these people, okay? The Mississippians. It's a real archaeological term that specifies a group of people that practice the same cultures, that practice the same economic trade practices. Let's go into it.
thing is, I'm going to talk about a time period that we have pretty well dated. We have about 51 radio.
Don't buy solar panels. Seriously. There is a very good reason why we're saying this. If you're thinking...
On radiocarbon dates from throughout the Northeast Florida area that dates his time period. We call it St. John's 2, and it dates to 900 to 1250 AD. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm always just going to say like 1,000 years ago. Okay, just make it easier, but just kind of keep that in mind. This is probably the first time that the Native Americans of this area are really living in kind of village situations. They're in communities, they have burial mounds, communal cemeteries, and there's probably about 11 of these at this time. So we're probably looking at just north of the JU campus, along the lower part of the St. Johns River, up onto the various barrier islands leading to the northern tip of Amelia Island and Old Town. So we have 11 of them. We're not sure if they're precisely contemporaneous, but they all fall into that 900 to 1250 time range. The other thing is that these guys are fisher hunter-gatherers. They're not agriculturalists. Agriculture is going on among groups within the interior southeastern United States, but along the coast here, they're shellfish collectors and they're fisher folks with terrestrial animals being hunted, but at a much, much smaller scale than aquatic animals. And the last thing is that these guys, in terms of our research, it's multi-scalar. And what I mean by that is we want to look at the Native Americans who are living here in Jacksonville.
So listen.
How they're interacting within their own village, with adjacent villages. Then we want to expand it to look at the regional level. How is that village really reacting or interacting with other villages along the broader St. Johns River and also the broader northeastern Florida? And then how are they actually interacting with a broader world? And their world at this time is not a global world, but it's a world that's going to be covering much of the eastern and midwestern United States. Okay, and as you're going to see here, that they were really not ever cut off from the developments and the events that were going on in the interior United States. Okay, all right. So we start at the broader scale. We look at this kind of world scale that they were dealing with. We refer to it at this point in time, 1000 AD, as the Mississippian world.
So this is the Mississippian world, okay? This is what a Mississippian looks like right here. This is Satriona from Florida. The place that he's talking about down here. We have emperors in 1562. All right, understand 1562, the time period. So I really want everybody to understand timelines. Because when we talk about different things, we just jump all over the place from ancient to modern. You really can't do that. So this guy lived in current times, AD 1562. All right. Christopher Columbus supposedly made it to the Caribbean in 1492. So this is 1562 in North America. Really what should be called the Mississippi. All of North America should be called the Mississippi based off the fact that we have the Great Mississippi River. Okay. So they're naming the people after the land. The land is named after the people. The people is named after the land. These are Mississippians. And it doesn't matter if you're from way up here, and it doesn't matter if you're from way down here, or even if you're from California. This is the Mississippi. Okay?
This is the height of socio-political complexity among Native Americans in eastern North America. Okay? This is the time to have chiefdom-level socio-political organization, which means that there are chiefs in villages who are controlling other villages. We also see that this is a time in which they're building these large platform mounds, which are these elevated kind of earthen structures upon which their temples and their elites and the chiefs' buildings are erected. They're also involved in these long-distance interaction networks. This is a big thing that's going on. What's really driving their economy is that these are major farmers, alluvial farmers. So they're generating surpluses here of corn, beans, and squash, and it's leading to institutionalized inequality, that there are clans that are higher ranked than others. So what we'll see here is that some of these groups, that differences are inherited and culturally reproduced. So it matters what family or clan that you're born into. All right? So these
people have real political systems going on. about, right? So when we look at this, understand that the Mississippian is not the Native American. The Native American that we think, like 19 Keys said, they look like the modern day Mexican or Hispanic. Okay, that's not who the Mississippian is. He's not talking about those people. Those Siberian, those Mexican, Hispanic looking people. This is who we're talking about. We come out of here, Hero Hawk and Open Hand. All right. Like, let's look at the Art Institute of Chicago in association with Yale University Press. They tell you right away. Right here. They appear to have a family affinity with the arts of Mesoamerica and other regions of the Americas, where early societies arose and flourished, but the imagery is subtly distinct, meaning that the Mississippian pottery and everything that they produced that was just immaculate was subtly distinct in its own. So you know when you see Mississippian artwork or pottery or stone tools, okay, it was subtly distinct and is also different from that of the well-known arts of 19th and 20th century Native American peoples. They telling you right here that the Mississippians are not the Native Americans. These people are not the Native Americans. They're Mississippians. And this is why you have people that look like Flavor Flav. This is the reason why you have people that look like Shaquille O'Neal that are, or who's NBA Youngboy or something. You know what I'm saying? Kodak Black. This is what we were. This is the Mississippian, the correct name for the so-called African American, the correct name for the so-called foundational Black American. And they explain exactly who the Mississippian is. So we can look in here. In a general sense, all of the farming peoples of eastern North America, from the eastern edge of the Great Lakes Plains to the Atlantic coast, and from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, were Mississippian peoples. Okay, that's the core Mississippian civilization was the Mississippi Valley and the valleys of its major tributaries, the Ohio, the Tennessee, the lower Missouri, the lower Arkansas, the lower Red River, together with the coastal plain along the Gulf. The post-contact peoples of this area were descending. The post-contact people of this area were were the descendants of the peoples most directly linked to the development of the great Mississippian chiefdoms. They were the true Mississippians. And they get into who the Mississippians were. Okay? The Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Muskogee, the Creek. All right? This is out of Hero Hawk and Open Hand. This is when we get into our real spirituality. This is when we get away from Egyptian beliefs. Let me show y'all something. Art, ritual, and chiefly warfare in the Mississippian world. Who's the Mississippian? Let me show y'all who the Mississippian is. Y'all remember this? That's Saturniona right there. Y'all remember these? This is from Theodore DeBry. So in this book, which when you do the real research, and you go into Theodore DeBry, Discovering a New World, you get to see that